The views and opinions expressed in the Unnecessary Thoughts podcast are those of the authors and speakers and do not reflect the official policy or position of DAC, Hmong District, or the CMA. Any content provided by podcasters or guests are their opinions and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything.
All right. Thank you guys for joining in again. This is our third episode of the Unnecessary Thoughts podcast. Excited to be here again. Me and Peter are here with you guys, and we have a special guest with us, our first guest of the day of the podcast history. So we're excited to have her here. Her name is Yang Her. I'm going to give it over to her so she can introduce herself to the world and just tell a little bit about herself to you guys.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yang. 31 years old, college graduate, did 3 years at a public university and 3 years at a private Christian college to graduate in 6 years. So that's kind of my background, and currently working as a coordinator for the International Placement Office and sending out long-term missionaries for the Christian and Missionary Alliance.
Oh, wow. You had...
Dang, man.
Oh,
Look how
wow.
classed over
Oh,
here.
wow. Okay.
Now.
But before we go anywhere, we just want to say happy birthday. Well, happy late birthday, Yangers.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Or anti-Yangers to some of us.
Yeah. She just turned 22. She didn't say 31. Yeah, so now we're just gonna, there's a few things we're gonna talk about today. We've been going over this idea of should Hmong being in a church name, and Peter and I have talked about it twice, and we've had a lot of male perspectives,
Yes.
and we've talked about other male perspectives too, on the side that agree with getting rid of it and the side that agree with keeping it. So now we have a new perspective, and it's going to be from Yang, and she offers a perspective that's different because she's female, and also she has been involved in the church for her whole life, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna talk about that. It's just if the Hmong word should be in church names, and again, just to clarify things too, if you guys didn't listen to the other podcast, is that we understand that it's not a core issue, but it can lead to core issues. Me and Peter ourselves, we say that we should probably get rid of it in today's time, and we don't think it's relevant now. So yeah, Yangers, do you have anything to really say about it? What's your idea on what we should do? And if it's not what a lot of people are saying, it's not a core issue, maybe we should talk about the core issues. But yeah, what's your thought on Hmong being in church names?
Mm-hmm. I think because definitely being second generation, but then also growing up being the oldest, so that I'm definitely raised a little more traditionally, but then also seeing it like always serving in the church, being in leadership, and being a female. For me, especially like with Hmong, being in the name of a church, I don't necessarily have a yes or no. That does it. Is it necessary or is it unnecessary? Just because I feel like where the Hmong church is today, it's in a state of transition. It's in a state of in between. And so I don't think there's definitely one way or another. I know that there are opinions and perspectives from both sides. And just because history, especially with the Christian Missionary Alliance and including having a Hmong district. So, we look at it, the Christian Missionary Alliance decided to have ethnic districts start because of being connected by a language and a culture. And so that's why it was a way to honor those cultures and those language ethnic groups where they have a commonality as far as language and culture, so they can better understand themselves, they can better lead themselves, and that's why Hmong district exists. And I think a lot of times it was just like to differentiate that this is a Hmong church. So there will be language, there will be some cultural things that are going to be different from your normal white American church that exists in the U.S. And so I think that was definitely one part of just identification, specifically, that who do these churches belong to? Back in the day, that's why you have you go to cities and there are a lot of churches that are like First Baptist Church of whatever city, First Alliance Church, First Presbyterian Church, First Lutheran Church, just because they were the first churches from that denomination in that community. And that was to set them apart because they were very specific different beliefs in doctrine, theology that set them apart. And that was a way to identify that so that when people came in, people would understand that. Whereas nowadays, I don't feel like where Christianity is today in the West, people necessarily look at those denomination as strictly as they did back in the day, just because as now today we have non-denominational churches too, a lot of those as well. And so, I mean, my thoughts are that it's not necessarily yes or no, but I think depending on the context in which the church exists, I think that matters, and it can lead to hindering the church and what the church does. I do think that the name in itself is not necessarily only holds the identity of the church. Just because I have seen some Hmong churches that even though they have Hmong in their name, that that hasn't hindered them from being able to reach out to the local community. That hasn't hindered them from reaching out to other people. Or even where the church is only specifically Hmong, whereas in speaking and you having to learn Hmong and you having to only have to function culturally Hmong. But I think our Hmong church in America is in a very interesting state of transition as far as between the older generation, first generation, and second generation. Where now we are having to, think through some of those things as far as, because I think second generation, we definitely identify more as American versus Hmong, just because, we're not growing up in that. And some of our parents don't enforce us to do all those Hmong things or hold us to those necessarily, just because we don't live in that context and culture. And I get that it's different for other people because we live here in Colorado where I feel like we're definitely not like forced to definitely be really Hmong as compared to like largely populated Hmong areas like California, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And so I feel like for us, like we're even different in the fact that like we know even less of a lot of those Hmong customs and cultural things. But I feel like definitely like the context and where the church is definitely that definitely changes the context or the audience of the church and the church body. But I think some churches, I mean, I know I've heard you guys talk about like, English services, second gen churches, and things like that too. And so right now, being in a state of transition, I feel like those are ways that the church is trying to move forward. But because we're still held to, we do have older generation where Hmong is the only language that they speak or culturally they function in that way, so the church still primarily functions in that way because we have that, and I know you guys have talked about like the older generation does matter, and it is important that they are still being fed and reached to, and working in missions, like there's always something about someone hearing the gospel in their heart language, like that matters, and that makes a difference to them as well. So I feel like a lot of times it depends on especially the cultural context and where the church is, and also because I know like in Minnesota you have like your more traditional Hmong churches versus now you have second gen churches where it is only English speaking. There's even a church that is not a part of the Hmong district, that is part of the geographical, what we would refer to as like Mika district, where the pastor is Mika, but his wife is Hmong. And so, so we do have some of those coming up. And so there is some diversity, there's some space for that. But it is slow as far as change happens, because we are in this moment of transition and change. And so change is coming, but I think change is slow. Not to say that that's bad, but that's just kind of how the life cycle of it is, I guess I could say. Yeah. So those are some of my thoughts.
So I got a question for you then. Just to like pick at your brain a little bit and just to get your input though. Like, yeah, I totally agree with you, kind of like the state of the Hmong church right now, as being in this like transitioning stage, through like these cultural gaps that we're kind of experiencing. What would you say, I guess, is a way we can, in the local church, go about this transition in a way that keeps harmony between the body? And I think that's one of the hardest things that we're trying to get at. It's like I feel like me as being like a Hmong American who's dominantly American, like like I just need to like separate from the Hmong culture in general to like, you know, like fulfill my spiritual needs. And like, yeah, it's just like, do you think there's a way that I can, you know, like fulfill my spiritual needs while being still unified within this largely dominant Hmong culture, church kind of background, you know? And yeah.
Yeah, I think my personal thoughts on that is like, because we come from this multicultural background of like community based, right? And whereas then like now as us as second generation, we're growing up more American based, so more individualized. So for us, like leaving a Hmong church to attend a church where we feel that feeds us, you know, better spiritually, and can definitely feed us more, is seen as being a traitor, or is seen as, you know, a bad thing, a negative thing. Yeah.
I'm a traitor.
And so it's seen as negative, but I don't think, because in the context of the community, that they understand that, because it's like within the Hmong community, it's like, we are a community, we're a family. Like, you would never leave, you'll always be loyal no matter what. Like, you will stick through it no matter what. And so now we're trying to reconcile those two differences, right? Of like being American versus like our families and our parents being more Hmong culture, community based. And so I think that within itself in the church continues to just influence it in the way that we do church. Whereas, you know, it's kind of like still, even though, you know, majority of them can be English speaking, they've learned to speak English well, they still function very Hmong. And I think that's something that they haven't quite, or the church hasn't quite been able to just process through, and to realize that the greater picture is being kingdom minded versus being only our church, or even just CMA minded, or just being even our specific church minded. But it's like kingdom minded, as far as like, as long as, you know, you're not going to, you know, believe in like universalism where like all roads lead to heaven, as long as it doesn't compromise, you know, the gospel and the Jesus that you believe in, then I think, you know, that's one thing where a lot of our churches are not quite yet there. And that's why it's seen as a negative thing, because it's like, you would never leave your community, you would never leave your family that's committed to you, that you're committed to, that you're a part of. And I think as far as like for like second generation and how to address some of those things and how to move towards some of that is just really, you're gonna have to be honest and expressing it, but then also being honest that the reality right now and where the state of the church is that it's not gonna happen overnight. In a lot of my conversations with younger Hmong Christians, single adults, their frustration is, you know, how come I can't be in leadership, or the church doesn't allow us to do this or to do that? And a lot of times it's kind of like, you know, sometimes some of them feel entitled. I've gone to Bible college, come back, why aren't they using me? Why aren't they approaching me? But at the same time, it's kind of, you know, what have you shown the church? That you are committed to the church, that you want to serve, that you want to lead something. The other thing is, a lot of our second generation, they feel like they have to have permission, which is great because of this whole respect towards the elders. But also sometimes I feel like, you know, if you want to lead a Bible study, then lead a Bible study. Because it's like, you know, it's not necessary that people have to give permission, but if you feel like you need to lead that for like a group of people, or a group of, you know, young men that you know, or young women that you know, then do that. You know, it doesn't have to be a formal thing.
Oh yeah, okay. I was about to say, just like outside of like kind of the mainframe leadership ministries, like you just leading like your own kind of little thing.
Right.
Outside, you know?
Yeah, because I feel like at the end of the day too, it's going to take the whole church. It's not only the leadership team that disciples. And if we only look to the leadership team to be able to disciple and to do things, then the church will never grow. And that's not what we are each called as believers, is to only allow discipleship to be done by leadership. But it's each one of us that goes to preach the gospel, but then also disciples other believers.
That's a good point you make, where us like second gen people look for permission, because honestly, before even starting this podcast, man, there's so many thoughts of, oh shoot, well, am I going to disrespect anybody? Am I going to dishonor anything? Like, what am I going to do? It's not the norm to talk. I talk out loud in like something like this in a podcast format. So it's like, okay, if I start this up, yes, my opinion matters, but am I going to hurt somebody's feelings? Do I need permission from these certain people? So even in this aspect of starting a podcast, which is separate from the church, you still have that mindset of, okay, I just don't want to dishonor my family. So yeah, there is definitely that culturally kind of infused in us, I guess you would say, where it's just you kind of grew up like that, and it is good. And yeah, at the same time, you have to look at it and be like, it's just time for you to make your decision to do something like serving for the church or starting your own Bible study. And it does take that step of courage, and it kind of takes I guess it kind of takes us kind of speaking about it too, because I more than likely there are people who are in that situation where I know I can do it, but I have to go through these levels of leadership. So
like you gotta jump through hoops or something.
So you gotta, so yeah, that definitely does play a role. That's a good point to pull up. And something else that you brought up too is just the kingdom minded. I think a lot of people do get lost in this. Like it stops at like lower levels of it's just community minded or it's culture minded, and that's it. And or church minded, where it's I would defend my church regardless of whatever happens. Like, this is my church, this is what I stand for. But yeah, to open up your mind to be kingdom minded and to search out things that will feed you spiritually, that definitely is the route that you have to take, which was kind of my route. And yeah, the issues that you kind of ran into with Hmong churches was that you just different people. When I left the church, the Hmong church, there was a lot of that betrayal and like, this guy is a traitor and all that stuff. So being kingdom minded is a good way to put it, where we can kind of put it in perspective of, is this for God or is this for like you and your church, and that's it, and you separate it when it should be. It's just an overlapping of like almost everything combined. But yeah, God's kingdom, the gospel being spread as the main thing.
Yeah, and I think that's, and that is a part of like this whole, like, whether the word Hmong is necessary or not within the name of a church. And what I've seen is that there are a good amount of even Hmong CNMA churches that have moved away as like new churches are starting and things like that. Like, they're not using necessarily the word Hmong in their name of their church, just because it is different. But there are some that still keep it just because, to identify themselves, so that someone who, when they are non-Hmong, they come in, their expectations aren't different too. That like they can, and I think that's part of it too, is like that the expectation is that like, well, if you're going to come to this church, then like we do function more Hmong culturally, and we do speak the language Hmong. And not to say that that's necessarily bad or good, but then also to say, it is a way to identify the church as a whole, so that people don't have these expectations that may not necessarily be met by a church. Because I know as people look at church, people are looking for different expectations. They're looking for different things to meet their spiritual needs. And across the board, 100%, you'll never find one that is 100%, but you will find one that will meet the best of your needs, and not to say that, that's necessarily good or bad, but also there are times where, depending on what it is that, where it is that you are and what it is that you're looking for too, there are times where you choose a specific church in order to help be the change in that church too. And I think that's one thing too, is like, for a lot of our young people, because we all are going to be called in so many different ways and to different places, but not to just look at our Hmong churches currently too, because I think this is another struggle with that, because I think the struggle with the name Hmong being a part of the church name is that there's something innately that has happened that some people struggle with as far as like identifying with Hmong, whether it be hurt by culturally, different things. And I know for a lot of the second generation, it is that like being hurt by some very specific cultural things that have happened to them within a Hmong church. And not to say that, you know, like that's not important, because it is. Because then at the end of the day, like that's not a church, you know, because when we look at church, what church should be, and loving one another, one body in Christ, it's, you know, and so that bad taste, I guess you can say, you know, is something that definitely forces someone to say, hey, like that's not church and this is not what it should be like. But for a lot of us young people, we've been able to experience a lot more too outside of our Hmong churches, I believe. There are some that have definitely just only grown up in their own church, but I think there's a good amount of us that have been able to experience different churches, and how they function, and how they're set up, and things like that. In which, why I think for our churches, our Hmong churches in the U.S., the main struggle is not necessarily generational, but it's more cultural. Because it is a battle between Hmong culture and American culture. Within like some of these young pastors going in, they are functioning more from an American cultural perspective, and what they've learned, just being educated here in the U.S. and things like that, and not, you know, growing up in the Hmong culture, not necessarily knowing all that. And so I think that's where our main struggle is it's more a cultural struggle versus a generational struggle.
That's a very good point to bring up, because generationally, I think one of the comments that was said was language barriers didn't stop us from having relationships with our grandparents and all that stuff, but I think it is a pull of culture more so than anything else. Like, yeah, generation is different to culture, because they're like, even I did some of the research for the Baptists. They started not having their Baptist name in their churches because of they had a bad taste. They had a bad taste of, hey, this is like what the Baptists used to do. It's like more condemnation, so they wanted to drop it. And now I've heard experience too where Hmong females do, like, they no longer like to associate with Hmong males because of the cultural life that they kind of came over from Laos to over here, was just Hmong males were just, you know, overbearing. There was just no freedom or anything. So I know some experiences of females who just, they don't want anything to do with the Hmong culture. So yeah, if that definitely, if you do have Hmong in the name, that definitely would be a bad taste. Like, I would not want to go to a church that has Hmong in it, because I understand how culturally, just through history, the Hmong men have kind of been certain ways, not all men, but yeah, it's just certain ways of being too restrictive or all that stuff. So it is a bad taste. So yeah, the Baptists, a lot of them just got rid of it too, and because it was like that, it was bad taste. This is not bridging the gap of bringing people in or just telling them that, hey, you can come here for a safe place, but it was more of a, that's danger over there. I don't know if I want to go there. I don't want to get condemned or anything over there. So they are the cultural and generation differences. We probably should separate that. And it's two completely different things. So, man, that's I guess generationally too, though. How would you say leadership should kind of function between that then? Like, do leaders have to completely get rid of the Hmong culture, or like what balance can there be between generational and cultural? Because there are some people who do understand, like, even if they're older than us, they're like in their 40s and 50s, they understand from our point of view, and they understand that this is biases like come into play too, and it's like you grew up that way, so you kind of have affiliation for that certain thing. So where can the leaders come in and be helpful to, especially like the youth? I don't even know their opinions on this, honestly. I don't know if they care about it or they even think about it. So where can we kind of bridge the gap between generational, cultural, what is good and what is not good?
I think a lot of it starts with humility on both ends, because I think if we're going to get through this together as one body, as Hmong people, in the context of our conversation, then there has to be humility from both ends. Meaning older generation, they'll have to put aside their pride too and be welcoming to the next generation, because we're not, like I said, we're growing up American cultures, in an American culture where leadership is not necessarily earned through a passage of rights, but leadership is earned through experience or education. And so I think there definitely needs to be some humility there as far as like understanding the next generation, how we look to leadership, that we feel like as young people, we don't have to wait till we go through a passage of rights, getting married, having kids to actually be able to step into a position of leadership. Whereas even for us as the second generation or, the younger ones, we need to have some humility in that, they do function in a cultural way. So how do we navigate that to the best of our ability and learn some of that rather than just saying, that's the old way. We don't want to do it that way, but understanding that they function in that because that's basically all that they know. That's their cultural background. To learn and to navigate some of those avenues, to be able to open up doors where we can both meet in the middle to be able to serve in leadership. And then even as for women, honestly, like for me personally, I feel like I've never been hindered as a female, or I've never not have a voice. And reason being is, and I do believe this truly to my core, that when God wants you to have a door and have a voice, he will let you have a voice in that. God has been faithful. Every place that I've been where I've interacted and been on committees with just mainly men and Hmong pastors and things like that, and been in rooms to be able to have conversations and things like that with pastors, and especially also older generation pastors. It's through God's faithfulness of I know that he wants me to be speaking and to have an influence in that place and at that time. And he opens those doors and to be able to faithfully step through it. It makes me think of Lydia in the Bible because, most people don't know it, but because of her faith, that's why the Church of Thyatira actually existed, because she was the first believer and then her family became believers. So it's like, and she was a businesswoman. So it's like God has used women before in being those leading figures and giving them voices and a place too in leading. But it's, up to God's timing. And I feel like I never have to ask for a voice, which is nice. But I'm not minimizing other women who have had to fight for a voice, because I know that that does exist within our Hmong culture, of just, within our culture, that's just how it is. Sure. Men have definitely been more dominant. Women don't have a voice and things like that. But I do feel like, be faithful to God, walk where he calls, and he'll open the doors and he'll give you a voice where he needs you to speak.
Yeah, so for you, for sure, like, I've seen that. I've seen, growing up with you and just kind of seeing, you've always been, like, at a position of leadership, so what would you say to, like, the young girls who are trying to come up? Like, what
how do you get there?
Yeah, how do you get to where you're at, possibly? What kind of good information can you pass on to them, especially in the Hmong culture? What can you do? How can you voice your opinions in a way where it's gonna be respected, or just how do you voice your opinion? Because I know a lot of females just don't voice their opinions just because they're afraid of the backlash, afraid of, even if it's not male, it's just their other peers too, of just saying you can't do, you're a female. Even now, I would think I've seen a resurgence in, like, the Hmong community where females are being given a platform now, like, more often than not, to speak. So yeah, what would you say to younger women and younger girls who might be struggling with not having a voice? How can they get to where you are, and how can they kind of have the mindset that you've kind of developed?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's seeking God and seeking where it is that God is taking you and where he has placed you. Because when you're continuing to seek after God, then he will open doors and he will give you places to speak. But I would also say, check your heart. Why is it that you want a voice? Because I so many times come across women too who want a voice just because they want a voice, because they're like, I'm not being heard, or my opinion, like, I have to voice, I have to have a say in everything. And so I would say, definitely check your heart to make sure, like, is this coming out of place of, like, my own personal heart, or is this really coming out of place of where God wants me to be speaking or to have a voice, because I think that's very important, and I think that matters.
Yeah.
When you're not being led by the Holy Spirit, but you're being led by you yourself and what your human heart wants.
Yeah.
And so I would say, definitely those two places, continue to seek God. And where I am today and the leadership positions that I've been in have definitely never been on my own accord, never been by my own power, but by the power of God and His Holy Spirit and where He has led me. Any leadership position I've ever taken on, I have always prayed about it before taking it on. That's important to pray before you. Yeah. Just because people look to you and say, hey, you should be in this role doesn't necessarily mean you should be in that role. Yeah. Because people who definitely want power will always say yes. And they will definitely be led out of a place of wanting position and title versus leading and serving according to God and what He has. And I would say, especially for young women, it's just continue to follow God day by day and being faithful, because that's really all that it is for me, is being faithful and being discerning to the Holy Spirit where the Holy Spirit is leading, and to be able to walk in those doors and to walk confidently. When God gives you a voice and you know that it's a voice from God, then pray for boldness to be able to express that. Not boldness in a way where you're going to condemn and yell, in that type of a way, but in a way where you can, voice in a loving manner as well. That will be glorifying to God.
Because we talked about this in the last podcast too, where the forms of leadership have always been where like somebody just pops up, and then because nobody else is taking the position, it's like, hey, you're the new lead for this position. So I'm guessing from what you said, it is very important to, from the leadership level, and I guess just any level, it's just, even for the females and the males, there needs to be a better way of discipling and growing leaders rather than just thrusting people into. So if you're a young female, then the next logical step is to find a female who is in a position of leadership to kind of like, hey, can you mentor me and can you disciple me? And it goes for male and female, where it shouldn't be how it has been kind of in the past, where you are voluntold, as they say, but it is a place where your heart is correct, and then if you want to be in a position of leadership, you seek it out through that person to see if they can disciple them and teach them. I would say that's a healthier way. I think that's how it was meant to be anyways, to grow leaders.
Yep, I totally agree. Yeah, because dude, I definitely feel that that's just been the case with a lot of people wanting to step into leadership, and then the people who aren't currently in the leadership, it's like this automatic disqualification of in order for you to be here, you must do this first, do that first. I can't even see you doing that. How you expect to lead God's people? And that's their expectation, and yes, that is so correct, but the way that they go about it is they just stand there and do nothing and watch, and that's kind of what, that don't make no sense, but yeah, definitely it comes through the training up of leaders, and by other leaders, because they don't just come sprouting out out of the ground, but
yeah, I mean, and I think that goes back to just discipleship is just so important, of just not just leaving people out there on their own, but that there is discipleship. And I think that's definitely something that church in general, discipleship of the next generation is lacking.
Gotta do podcasts on that one too.
Which I mean, this is where the core issues are sprouting out, because even with the name issue, we know with Hmong in it, we kind of understand how the Hmong have functioned in the last 40 years, and so that having that in the name too kind of draws to these core positions of, man, we've been doing a few things
fundamentally incorrectly,
And again, it's good to have these conversations because, like, if you bring it back to your local level and you go back and you actually talk to your people in your church, if these conversations are not happening, they probably should be happening, rather than leaving it for the next generation. Because, like I said again, one of the comments said that we should be waiting 30 to 50 years before we address issues. So the issues are happening right now, and again, names can lead to core issues, and core issues are starting to sprout out right now. We're just kind of talking about it right now. So yeah, discipleship probably should be looked at and changed, because there have been a lot of times where I've been in a position of leadership that I probably shouldn't have been, but who else was there? And that was the question that I always asked too. And there's been position of leaderships too where you do your mentality where you haven't checked your heart, and you're like, man, I'm gonna have this position forever. So anybody who would come and try to take that position, you kind of sabotage them. Yeah, it's like you're not gonna get this position. I'm gonna be this. So yeah, ideologies of like how we kind of grew up and the culture in which we kind of grew up. Like, we're speaking of core issues right now, but so just kind of wrap up this segment. It's just your stance is there is no yes or no on Hmong in a name. There is benefits and to have it and to not have it. There's really, I guess there's an in between that we kind of have to look at both ways. If you were, I guess the final question is like, if you were to start a church or plant a church, would you bring it into your name as like, would you name your church with Hmong in it, or would you leave it aside?
I think it would definitely depend on who it is that I'm reaching out to. Whether if it's a community type of a church, or am I being put into a community where there are Hmong people where this would matter to them. Just because I think within the context of who it is that you're trying to reach, it would matter. Because if it is you're reaching out to Hmong people, then Hmong people find comfort in that, knowing that this is a Hmong church. Just because as being a minority people group that's been oppressed for so long, that has had land taken away, has just basically been trying to survive, that's kind of how they function too. So having the different racism that, Hmong people have faced throughout the years too, having the name Hmong in the name just brings a level of comfort. It breaks down all sorts of other walls too. Whereas if you're looking at, reaching out to a community where it is multi-ethnic, because you guys talked about multicultural, but I have some other thoughts too about that. Multicultural churches too, but a multi-ethnic church, and I'll explain why I say multi-ethnic versus multicultural. But multi-ethnic church, then dropping that name. I mean, having Hmong in the name doesn't matter, because that's not who it is that you're reaching out to. So I think it depends. Definitely my stance on having Hmong in the name or not is really geared towards who is the church? Is the church being the church? Is the church reaching out? What is the church doing? Versus hinging it on the label of having Hmong in it. Because you can still be a Hmong church and still reach out to others. Some churches do it better than others, but that I don't think it excuses you from the call of God and what God is calling us to be as Christians. Now, multi-ethnic versus multicultural, we use the term multicultural a lot, meaning many cultures, but majority of churches, do they really function as a multicultural church where they celebrate every single culture and use all those expressions of all those different cultures, or is it a multi-ethnic church functioning in a majority culture? And that's where I feel most of the multicultural, quote unquote, they function as multi-ethnic in a majority culture, which is usually the American culture, English-speaking culture.
That's some good insight.
Dropping some knowledge. That's a good way to look at it. Multicultural and multi-ethnic. There are two differences. And now when I look at the church where I'm attending, I feel like it's more... Actually, it could be both.
Unicultural, but multi-ethnic.
Yeah. I mean, it's predominantly white, but the culture is Americanized. So, dropping some knowledge, okay? New things to
Yeah.
look at.
So just things to think about. But I mean, those are definitely things that I've learned, over in my
experience.
position as far as coming into contact with different people who definitely do a lot more research into this and speak about this, speak about, people movements all across the world, because we are looking at a very diverse U.S.
Yeah.
And we are looking at very diverse communities. And so what does that mean, especially if we are aiming to be multicultural, because I know cultural churches, they all differ across the board too. Because I know, like, especially for us as Hmong, like, we would struggle going into a black church, especially in the South, like, where the services run like 4 or 5 hours, they're singing, they're jumping, they're hopping. And it's just like, it's different culturally, but would we also accept that within our church as well, So it's kind of conversations like that when you look at it culturally. Would we accept all those different forms of culture? But,
I do got a question for you.
yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I was just wondering, since like you kind of work with like CMA and stuff, do you know if any, like, the trend of the churches of like CMA churches, not just Hmong, but like other ethnic groups, like, I don't know, like Cambodian, whatever, and just kind of like the phase that the Hmong church is going through, do the other churches as well go through that kind of like transition? And if they do, like, and if how has those trends been going on, like Vietnamese or something, or like if there's like Japanese churches, because like they've been in the United States for a while, before like Hmong people and stuff, but
Yeah, so we actually have very few Japanese Alliance churches here in the States, but we do have Japanese churches in Japan, Japanese Alliance churches. Definitely so our other ethnic districts, we have Cambodian, we have Vietnamese, we have actually an African association. So we have a lot of different ethnic districts and associations within the CNMA. And I can tell you that they all, not necessarily, especially all the Southeast Asian ones, like, they're all struggling with the same issues of this first gen and second gen. How are we working to bridge some of that, so that in the future our churches will still exist, because those are always the questions is, how can we set up our churches to be lasting, to continue on, and to not die out. We used to have a Lao association. As far as I know, I think we have 1 or 2 churches only now, just because they lack younger leaders. Like, they don't even have younger pastors who can rise up to be pastors in their association, in their churches. And I think it's just, as we're here in America, it's changing. The shift is happening, as people, there are interracial marriages, as younger people are identifying as more American, they are finding other churches that they can attend that meet their spiritual needs, and it's not necessarily the commitment to their people group or to their ethnic. So
I always find that fascinating, where like sometimes you're so tunnel vision, where you're just like, man, this is only happening to my people, but then you look at history and everybody seems to go through some of these, and maybe like it is a good idea for us to partner, I guess, or like partner up or research these things, because before I even did like these topics, I did a little bit of research, and then just seeing everybody's going through these situations, like eventually you will get there where you're having disputes. So it's not particularly just the Hmong people, it's across the board where this issue is springing up, and definitely good to talk about. And I think what you said too, definitely about having the purpose of, like, if you have a purpose of where you're going to go, then that's where you can come together with the other leaders to decide on the name. If it is going to go after the Hmong people, then I definitely see that as a purpose, as bringing comfort to people, and that makes sense. And if you're not going to go after the Hmong people specifically, then that would be a case where it's like, don't have it in your name. That's fine. So, yeah, those are really good points to bring up for this topic. Again, like I told you, you add quite, like, with you working with the CMA also, that definitely helps us understand the vision kind of where the CMA is and what they're dealing with too. And it's not just a me against the world type of mindset, but it's more of a, man, we all need help together to kind of get through this and this situation.
Yeah, and that's just the thing too. Is like the CNMA as a whole, you know, we are working towards addressing this too, the diversity within our denomination, because 42% of our churches currently are within our ethnic districts, and that's grown drastically. So when you think we have over 2,000 churches here in the U.S., 42% of them are within our ethnic districts or non-English speaking. Wow. So it's a huge amount. And so when we even look at that, like we're even considering like within leadership, you know, how can we make it represent our churches more? And that's something that's on John Stumbo's heart that he's definitely been very intentional about too, just because there's importance in being represented too at a leadership level, and having a voice.
Okay. So yeah, I think if you guys have any more questions about this, continue to like reach out to us. And again, go to just open up conversations within your local community, within your local church. There are people who can help you with these thoughts, help you kind of navigate how to go about thinking and how to go about making a change. So if you definitely want to make a change in your church, then you're gonna have to do it with other people. Right now, we're going to switch over to the next topic, which is college and college debt.
Man, you my dad or something we about to talk about? I'm just kidding.
So we're going to talk about college and college debt. It is definitely... I'm going to throw some stats out there because I just pulled this up. 44 million borrowers collectively owe 1.5 trillion in student loan debt in the USA alone, and that's from Forbes. So the average tuition in state is roughly around like $35,000 to $50,000 a year, and out of state is about 80 to a year. No, 4 years. But the out of state is 80,000 to 120,000. So debt and student loans is definitely an issue. Personally, for me, I am a college dropout. Yo, Kanye West. So I'm a college dropout. I didn't really understand college. So for me personally, my debt is not. It's still there. I'm still paying it off, and it's been about, I think it's been 10 years. So it's been 10 years. I'm still paying off bits and pieces of my student loan. I have no idea. Like For me, I try to run away. Just kind of like Yang pulled up this. She read this article of a dude he went to college and then he ran away to China to teach English to the Chinese in their schools, but he ran away from $30,000 worth of debt, and he still continues to run away from that debt. He hasn't paid it off. He comes back to. He says that it just ruined his life. So Yang, being as that you are the only one who has a bachelor in here, and you've seen the steps it kind of takes to kind of balance everything out. What is college? Like, yeah, man. What is its purpose?
Was it worth it?
Was it worth it?
How did you do it?
How did you do it? Like, what?
Let me know.
Let the people know. Yeah. So, what is college? Is it relevant still today in America? Can it help you? Can it not help you?
What is college? It's a good question because I believe here in America, especially, college is defined many different ways just because of just life and how, especially here in the States, in order to have a job, you don't necessarily have to have a college degree. And the shift, just even within like a lot of jobs, into looking at experience versus a degree. there are still a lot of jobs that require you to have a certain level of education to be able to hold that. And just because of the belief of, learning specific topics, being able to major in that, intern in that, and study it specifically, and to focus on that, it makes sense. But there are roles here that it doesn't need that. And a lot of college students actually that I've talked to and interacted with, they actually don't work in the field that they studied. Just because, as an 18-year-old going into college, it's like you're making this life decision of like, I'm going to study this thing and this is what I'm going to work in for the rest of my life. It doesn't really happen. Just because, life happens, but then opportunities come and go too. And especially nowadays where a lot of, when they talk about the millennial generation and how it's like, never really being satisfied with one thing, but then always looking for the next thing, not being stuck in only one specific thing, and which I think is different from, the baby boomers and the older generations, just because jobs were, there weren't as many jobs as there are today, because then people provided at home too, and so we're looking into the transition. Today now they have like jobs like, I remember when they first came out with like social media manager, and I'm like, what? Someone's gonna get paid to just sit on Facebook all day? Like, what kind of job is that?
Get paid good money too.
Yeah, but it's like, but now in this digital age, like that's very important. So it's like you kind of got to know your stuff, whether it be you studied it or just by experience. College, my personal opinion, is not necessary for everyone. Learning styles are different. And so in this day and age where a college degree is not everything, I think, we've kind of, societal pressures have pushed that to have a bachelor's, to have a master's, like that's everything that everybody should have. But that's not necessarily the case. I do believe that if your job requires it, then you should probably do it. But if you want to go into a field that it does require that, like, please don't become a doctor just because you dream and want to become a doctor.
YouTube some surgeries, and now you can perform surgeries.
But there are definitely roles where it's not necessarily needed. And I think just because everyone's learning style is different, so there are also different ways of, learning. There's vocational schools now, tech schools where like if you want to do just very specific in IT or computers, auto mechanic. I think that's the thing too, is like here in America is that not every job is equal. To have a job is like, it doesn't translate to you being able to provide for your family, but it's like to have a job, there's also like a ranking within that. Like you have to have like the job that makes a lot of money, or this job or that job. And so people look at that in that way. Whereas like when I travel overseas, like every person who works is respected, including a janitor of a subway station, because they have a job, they are providing for their family, and that is what is most important, is that they're being able to provide for their family. So I think that's a huge difference in like even how the West and how we are, like the thoughts that we have with like the American dream or college is. And so we push that onto everyone. It's not enough that you have a job and you're providing for your family, but you need to have the right job or a high ranking job to even be respected, and that's where I think it's sad that the perspective in America has to be like that, where it's like you have to have a degree, you have to, in order to be something. And that's just very personally because I do have a sibling that, he didn't go to college and do the whole 4 years right off the bat. And at first it was hard because we grew up in this Asian culture of like college, like 4-year degree, finish, and then you go work, right? And I took 6 years anyways. So, but like it was hard at first to be able to accept that, but then to learn that like, but that's not what makes him who he is. Because he was hardworking, he worked full time, was able to provide for himself, take care of himself, also still provide for our parents as he was living with our parents too. And so I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
And, not to discredit those who are hardworking and providing, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's about is, being a hardworking person, because there are some lazy people out there, being a hardworking person and providing for your family and for yourself.
Yeah.
I think we need to shift away from the degree, basically being the label and saying that someone is successful,
Worthy enough, yeah.
versus them being able to just find a job, work hard, and provide. So that's my personal stance, that college is not for everyone, and it's okay as long as, yes, you are working hard, providing, and you're good with where you are at life.
Yeah, and that was kind of my issue too growing up. It was because we kind of grew up in we did grow up in the Asian world, and that's all my parents knew. So they would force that on me whether they wanted to or not. It just kind of happened. So growing up I was mad confused because I knew I was horrible. I barely graduated high school. So if you barely graduated high school, you probably aren't going to do well in college, because college is not free. So my issue was just, the American dream was thrown on us. This is how you should do it. You got to go to your 4-year degree, get that good job, and then just kind of, that's it. That's the rest of your life. Just get by. So there were many signs too growing up, I think, where I was not, like, I was more of a creative than anything. So going to a traditional college or any type of class where you're just kind of sitting there and taking notes, that's a no-no for me. It's just not going to work out. So being able to understand that now and be able to have my kids, which I'm not going to force them to go to college, because like you said, it's just there is a switch coming on where it's not, people just don't view it as that important anymore. So now I understand that maybe, like, I should have, at 16, I tell people this all the time actually, like, if you're 16 years old or just going into high school, instead of wasting your summers, intern where you kind of want to, and just go that route of interning. Like, if you want to do media or if you want to do photography, then just find a really good photographer, and for your summer years, just be under that person, and then you can grow your, like, streams of income that way too. Just having this idea of what college is now, being 28, even, like, it kind of changes everything. So I kind of wish we knew this before we actually went through and got caught in this American dream.
I think just like my perspective on college, me being like a 23-year-old and having like some college experience, but like right now I'm like not in college, I would definitely agree. Like, there is this expectation that is placed upon like the young people that says, if like you get this degree and stuff, like, man, you'll be guaranteed just that easy life, like you'll have the job where you don't have to worry about going to work every day, and like it'll be easy for you. You have money for your family. Like, this degree will get you that. And I think just like working at the warehouse places that I've been working at over the past couple of years and stuff, and I can definitely see why people can come to that conclusion, because the thing that separates like just the common man worker in the warehouse between those who are telling them what to do, it's always education. So like, we see that and we go, oh, okay, if you're educated, you won't be like this, you'll be like them. And so we push for that, like our parents, they push for that. Like I see it, like, education is what makes the difference between these levels of, working labor. And I think for a lot of the case, that may be the case. But just for me personally, I think just like, I've always been taught and fed that there was like this fulfillment to be had in college education. And man, it was just like you get that degree, like, you're set. Like, you get that degree, like, all your parents they'll be okay with you, and your grandparents, they'll look at you like, hey, like, that's my grandson. Good job. And like, there's a sense of fulfillment in it, and like, it's advertised that there is this sense of fulfillment within myself once I get this degree, And I think as I've gone to college and have tried to go to college, I found this to be very false.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, just for me personally, you know, like the only fulfillment that we as Christians can have is not in education, but you know, but being known in Christ and knowing God.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do for a living, you know, it doesn't even matter. And I like what Younger said, you know, like in the West, and especially as an ethnic Hmong people who have come from overseas after the American dream, that's what we desire.
Yeah.
But like I like how Auntie Younger said, like, you know, like other cultures, they see a working person and like they have value because they work, and it doesn't matter what that job is, you know, like he's doing his thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a respectable thing. And I really like that. And just for me, like personally too, I was like just on the topic of like college, I feel as I've been kind of like over the years debating, oh, should I go back, or should I just like not go to college no more? Like I got a bunch of debt already. Like, is it worth it?
Mm-hmm.
The question I have to ask myself is obviously the one that Siachi posed. Like, what is college nowadays? I think when college first began, it was a place of study for like lovers of knowledge and people who wanted to study timeless truths throughout the ages. And these were like the really book kind of people, you know, and that's why the universities and stuff like they sprouted. But I think what's happening in our culture specifically, and the American culture, what we have done with college is that it has become more like nothing more than just basically, like, if I could break it down, like a financial investment, you know.
Yeah.
Like you put money into this college, and then hopefully that money will pay off for you in the future. And that's basically what you're trying to do, you know. Whether that's something that, hey, like I'm passionate about, I could do that, or if it's just, you know, to pay the bills. And yeah, I think just from my experience, even though I'm like the youngest one here, like, yeah, man, if I could take back the years,
You definitely would.
yeah, I definitely would. And I would definitely want to be a lot more wise of just like before like stepping into college, like in the first place, you know.
Yeah.
And I think we need to allow individuals that freedom, and just to give them that little leeway of like breath space to, you know, take the time and count the cost of college, so they're not running into these problems of like, oh man, like I got so much debt and like this ain't doing nothing for me, like I'm out, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, that's kind of just where my spiel with college is though. But yeah, honestly, like I've been kind of like looking, like wanting to go back though.
Don't go back. No, I think that brings up that's just, to me it seems like there's just a lot of confusion when you're an 18-year-old and you're gonna go somewhere. There's a lot of confusion because I thought financial aid was free money, like, so I had this misunderstanding of like, what is financial aid? So when I applied for it, and then like at the end of the semester, and they were like, it's time to pay up, I was like, oh my gosh. And my parents actually had to pay off, like they had good credit until they had to pay off my debt for me. So I didn't understand what financial aid was. I didn't have, like, I know I had two older sisters who went to college, but and they took care of all the financial aid, but I think there was just this misunderstanding of what financial aid was. And I get this is coming off from our cultural experiences and our first generation Hmong in America. It's just our parents came here from Laos, and then they grew up, and what worked for them was just getting a job and making sure that their children was taken care of, and then they wanted something better for us, so that was education. Go and get a college degree. But yeah, I had no idea that financial aid meant you got to pay back, and pay back indeed. So yeah, so now we're talking about like debt issues, like that is just crippling America. That's like nationwide, it's just crippling people. How would you help people out with your experience and how you've kind of budgeted certain things for it. Like how do you not get crazily stressed out about it? Because there's just so many people who are stressed out about it, and they might do what this guy did, who just fakes their own death or just tries to run away. And there's been cases of that. And like, even if you die, can the debt go away?
Depends on what type of debt.
There's
Read
different
the
types
fine
of debt.
print.
What? So what types of debt are there then?
Well, I mean, you have your student loans,
Mm-hmm.
so that's definitely one of them. But then there are others who take out private student loans from creditors,
Yep.
and so they're because the federal government only allows up to a certain amount, and so then if they need more, then they would have to go to a private institution. So like Wells Fargo, they do private student loans. Bank of America, yeah. So it depends on what type of debt you have. Some will stick with you, some will go to your next of kin. So
Which one are those one then?
so usually the private ones are the ones that you can't necessarily run away from. So read the fine print, so that you will know. But I think as far as like debt goes, because I mean I came out with a little less than 25,000 after 3 years at Toccoa. So I went to, my first 3 years were at the University of South Florida. So I stayed in state, lived at home, and commuted. So I came out debt free from that. Because the state has a really good program to help called Bright Futures, their scholarship. So whoever lives in Georgia or Florida, you guys have really good state programs with grants that definitely help. So work hard for those. I don't think Colorado does as good.
We have Colorado Opportunity Fund.
Oh.
But it's not that
cough.
much.
Yeah, I got $800 from that. Screaming cough. Just joking.
Yeah, so Florida Bright Futures actually pays either 75% or 100% of your tuition at least.
Oh, wow.
So then that definitely helps. So like with commuting from home, I mean, I didn't have lodging or a meal plan and things like that. So, but then I came out of that debt free, went to Toccoa for 3 years, and then came out with a little less than 25,000. And so I know like a lot of people come out, depending on which school they go to, they come out with a lot more.
Was that with? Did you get any grants or anything, or was
I
that,
did. Mm-hmm.
Also, you had grants.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and so for that, then I took out loans as minimal as possible, and I worked so that I didn't take out. So during my time as a student, I worked so that I didn't take out additional money to live on. That's the number one thing is like, I feel like college students, as they go in, they feel like, okay, I'm going to take out these loans, but it's like, when I have to pay them back, it's like, it's so far down the road.
Yeah.
But then it's like, it's only 4 years, and then
Yeah.
you have a 6-month grace period. So it comes a lot faster than you think. But then there are some who they don't work
At all.
At
During
all.
College. Wow.
during college, and so they either take out extra money or parents maybe provide it. But when you work, then you can pay back some of your loans already, so that they don't gain, all the interest doesn't build up later. But then also then you're paying for your own living expenses. You could be on a smaller meal plan so that you can, buy your own food. So you look at ways to decrease the cost of college
During your time at
right
college.
during your time at college, during your time in college, and then also at the same time is know what it is that you're really signing. That's the hard thing is a lot of students, they don't understand this whole financial aid, and you're right, like a lot of them don't understand it. You get this award letter and then it's like, oh, my whole education is provided for, it's good to go.
Yeah, stop talking about me, Yanger.
And so I just think that's the thing is like there's not enough people, classes, resources to educate 18-year-olds going into college in what it is that they are actually committing to financially, and for them to understand, yes, there are financial advisors, but they are not necessarily going to be people who really are going to help to explain some of that to you, to say, hey, like, they're not financial advisors, but they're just financial aid advisors. And so they're telling you basically, do you have enough money to go to school? Whether it comes from, whether that financial aid package is built of grants, loans, scholarships, whatever it is. And so I think for a lot of students is really understand what it is that you're signing for.
Yeah.
Because most of the time it's like most students nowadays, especially nowadays, as college has gotten more and more expensive, most students will be taking out loans to be able to go to college, to be able to get a degree. You can calculate the worth of it to your, for yourself. I'm not going to say, go to this college or that college, but people can calculate the worth for themselves. But just know what it is that you're signing for. And then post college, when you know that you have all these loans, because you do exit counseling, and then they tell you how much you have, make a plan of what you're going to do to pay it off and commit to it. Because that's the thing, is like with societal pressures, being in such a digital age, with this next generation, it's all about like having the newest, the trendiest thing.
Yeah.
So whether it be a phone, whether it be a computer, whether it be,
like
Netflix, it just any of those luxuries, and I honestly call them luxuries, because people aren't willing to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And what I always tell people when I talk to them about, paying back student loans and stuff is look at it as a short-term sacrifice for long-term peace. Because when you think about it, you go to school for 4 years. If you do the normal 4-year route, you come out, you're 22, 23.
Yeah.
And if you look at life expectancy being 65, like you still have like 40 years ahead of you that you're going to be working.
Yeah.
So why carry that weight of the debt for so long? Because I know that the federal government gives 10 years, but it's like, why carry the weight of that with you for so long? If you can just really sacrifice for the first couple of years, maybe the first 5 years post-grad, to really pay it off. And it does take making those sacrifices, but you'll live with long-term peace of being debt-free and not owing anybody anything. And then, you don't have interest payments that are building up, compounding, and then you can pay it all off and then save money and live life the way you want to live it.
Yeah.
And that could mean like, you have to live with your parents for a couple of years, and that's okay. And I think that's the thing, is like that has such a negative connotation to it nowadays, of like going back and living with your parents because it's seen as like failure.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm like, that's not failure, because you're saving money.
Yeah.
Like, come on, let's be real about that. Like, you're saving money, you don't have to pay for rent, and that allows you to put more money towards your loan payments. And then coming out of college, like, don't buy a brand new car. You don't need a brand new car. You need one that gets you to A to B.
Yeah.
So there's like little things like that. I mean, and you don't need the nicest, newest phone that's out there. The high tech ones. I've known young couples that have decided that they're not gonna like have Wi-Fi.
Wow.
They'll go to local coffee shops just to save on that every month. Don't have cable. Like, choose between cable and Netflix. Like, you don't need both.
Yeah.
So it's like there are little things that you can do, and really, like, I know budgeting is not for everybody. I live by a budget, so I know exactly like how much I have every month, and it's just a simple template. But it's like, because I feel like when people don't see it in front of them, like, it's so easy for them to just like, out of sight, out of mind,
swipe, yeah.
and then just to spend, and then it's like, oh, I don't have any more money. But when you can actually like look at it and quantify, like, wow, like this much is going towards, all my living expenses and everything. This is how much I have every month. Then you can also see, oh, like, wow, I have an extra $300 every month. Well, how about I allocate 100 of that extra to pay off debt? So there are just things like that where I feel like those are some smart things to do just for your life in general, that can help you in the long term as far as dealing with debt. And then to have a realistic picture of what it is that you make.
Yeah.
I think that's the other hard thing. And I think a lot of college grads too, they shoot too high. They think as they come out as a college grad that like,
they get a job
they're going to get a job where they're going to make a ton of money. And that's not necessarily the case. That may be for some people, but not everybody.
Yeah.
Just because you lack experience, you don't, you just got out of college. So don't shoot too high in thinking that, oh, well, if I just keep taking out these loans, like, I'll make, this much money and be able to pay it off right away.
Yeah.
Because that's usually never the case. But But I mean, those are just some of the things of helping to deal with debt, is just really know what it is that you're getting into, what you're signing for, and then really have a plan for it and stick to the plan. Because like I said, short-term sacrifice for long-term peace. So
I think that's it right there. Short-term sacrifice for long-term peace. Because even I tell married couples the same thing, like newly-wed married couples, sacrifice the short term of your privacy. Like, don't go and get an apartment. Don't go and get a house, because that's what me and my wife did. We got married and then we went and got an apartment, and we've never ever practiced budgeting too. So throwing $1,200-$1,300 a month where it has to go into housing, that money can, like, if you came from college, then that money, like rent money, can absolutely go towards your school debts. So short-term sacrifices, like I tell people all the time with marriage, like if you get married, yeah, feel free to go back to your parents. I mean, I don't think your parents are gonna like ban you from coming back and living with them. I think they bring more joy, and it's only 5 years, maybe 10 years at the max. But I think not having that vision and idea of, man, this is because we do live in a society where it's like, I want this now. So yeah, having that idea and having that mindset of, let me sacrifice this first 5 to 10 years of living like everybody else so that I can later on live like nobody else. So being able to come into it and have that mindset definitely is gonna change. That makes the difference between kind of failure and not failure. Although it's like, you just don't want to fail with that subject, because that subject is, yeah, if it takes you 20 years to pay off your loan, then you've just lived in slavery pretty much to your school debt. So that's a good point of just like, kids, if you guys are going to college and gonna finish, live with that mentality of sacrifice the little things right now so I can live for the bigger things later on in life. And it does mean 5 to 10 years, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, 10 years go by pretty fast. So
yeah, I mean, it's been like 7 years since I graduated from college, so it's gone by fast. So yeah, and I think it's just the thing is, like, to work hard while you're in college too. Like, you can work and do school at the same time.
And that also goes with the short-term sacrifice, huh? Because a lot of college students, they have their friends there. Like, it's so easy to just get lost in fun. So being able to sacrifice, again, that fun that a lot of college students live for, and working for it, because I do know people who don't. Yeah, they don't work in the workforce, and when they get out of college, the actual workforce is when they're 22, 23, which is kind of crazy to think of. So don't go to college, kids. Just joking. So there are ways. You don't have to run away from your school debt.
Yeah.
And just to kind of highlight, it is just this short-term sacrifice for long-term gains. Working hard during college, not slacking off in that aspect of, you can work and you just kind of have to sacrifice the fun.
Don't run away, it's illegal, so
Yeah.
you'll never be able to come back.
You'll be a criminal. One thing I want to bring up too, do you think in terms of the difference between picking college and not, do you think it is better to, because back in the day, if I was a blacksmith, my son would be a blacksmith, so it would be like, I would train him how to do a trade. So do you think we should kind of go back to that system where, and it's not like I said earlier, it's like, if you're interested in cinematography or videography, send your kid out to, like, as a parent or as an adult, is it better to just send your kid off to an apprentice and just let them be trained under somebody? Do you think that kind of system works better than the college system?
I think we need both in today's society, just because back in the day, they were very specific types of trades.
Yeah.
And back in the day where it was like a barter system, right? So like
Yeah.
you trade, whatever you're good at doing with someone, they're good at something else. Whereas today the roles in which society runs on, there's a vast amount of them. And I think that's one thing too, is just because, and what we've realized too, especially here in the West, is just because your dad was in this career or profession doesn't necessarily mean the kids will be in that, just because we've allowed kids to have that choice. That there are various ways that they can work, they can make a living. There are various ways, just because we're not stuck in just a small niche of trades. And so I think we'd have to be careful with that, just because I feel like if we if a marketer trains their kids only to be marketers, then it's kind of like you will continue to only have one way of doing marketing, but then also a very narrow way. But then what if the kid doesn't want to be a marketer? Then you have there are other professions too, various routes to work and to provide. But then I feel like the college system, we have to be okay with also people not going to college, because I think that's the thing too, is the education system, there is only one way of learning. It is set up only in one way. The intentions behind college were good, because it's like you want to create experts in these professions, to be able to go do those jobs. But nowadays, where you can learn anything by Googling or YouTubing, it does make it so much easier to learn those things, where it's not specific that you have to go to college to learn those things anymore. Then I think we have to be okay with the traditional route of college is not it's not necessarily for everybody. But then also having to be okay with people who don't study that for 4 years, people who don't have that bachelor's degree in it or master's degree in it, and looking at experience as well. And so that's why I've even seen some job postings where it's like, if you don't have education, then we will if you don't have the master's then or the bachelor's, then we require this many years of experience, versus that, which is super helpful, just because in today's day and age, the college degree doesn't necessarily make everybody, and that doesn't. And someone could have the degree, but then they actually suck at the job. So there are all those different, ways of thinking about it too. And so I just think, it is, we wouldn't be able to go to just one system, but I think there's definitely value in having both because I think as far as especially some of those roles where a degree isn't necessarily needed, then it's easy to learn. So then it's, things, that's why I feel like there's a lot more photographers today and videographers today than there ever was, just because it's more of a learned type of profession versus something that you have to go get a college education for. There are still some things like processing film or things like that maybe there are some techniques and theories behind it that someone would need to go to school to learn or go to a class to learn, but not necessarily a 4-year degree to learn. So
I always have this conversation with a buddy of mine where the rise of esports, which is electronic games, and how much money they're making. When growing up, we played I know so many gamers that probably could have been professionals. But during that time, again, it's the mindset. It's you got to get that 4-year degree. But now there's so many ways to bring in income, and these esports gamers, they're making quite a bit of money, and they don't have 4-year degrees. They have they just play games all day. That's literally what they do, and they get paid all the games. So what would be your last thing? What's your final thought to say if you were talking with an 18-year-old trying to make a decision on whether to go to college and kind of paint that picture of this is what you're going to expect? What would you say to that 18-year-old?
I think for me, wasn't necessarily saying anything, but just asking them some questions, just about what is it that you want to do, and really then to think practically how do you to get there. Because I think that's part of it is a lot of 18-year-olds, I feel, they don't know what they want to do.
Yeah.
They're going to college to either appease a societal pressure or pressures from parents, and things like that versus going for themselves, and what it is that they really want to do. And especially for those 18-year-olds, it's okay to not know what you want to do at 18. You literally just graduated high school and became a adult officially. And it's okay not to know what you want to do and to work or go to community college, get an associate's, for at least the first 2 years so that then you transfer in somewhere. To do some of those other things until, you know what you want to do, you know what you want to study, because I feel like that'll be a better investment of your time and of your money when you actually know what it is that you want to do. And there's nothing wrong with going to college later. There isn't anything wrong with that. It's okay. Everyone is on a journey and everybody's on a different journey. And there are different timings for everyone's journey. And so, but then if you do feel strongly that college is for you, then to just know what it is that you're signing up for financially, the program that you're studying, what the career aspects are. But then also to know that, you want to be a good steward of that time, that money, and that education.
Peter, if you were telling your 18-year-old self.
Dude, I was about to say that. Well, I would tell myself. Yeah, man, I think I would have to tell myself definitely pray about this decision, and not just like pray about it, but ask not only my parents, but
seek out other individuals.
Yeah, other individuals who have chosen different routes in their life and see what kind of wisdom they can offer me in pursuing education. So I would do that. I would definitely really tell myself, like echoing what Auntie Younger said, really know what I'm getting into and just count the cost of like what I'm getting into financially, and just on this on the perspective of the work ethic and the workload. And I really like what Auntie Younger said, being a steward of that, and really taking that seriously. I think that's something I wish I would have understood better when I was younger, because I felt like it was just this like pressure for me to like, man, I gotta get in. If I don't get in quick, then like everyone's like, oh, you never go back. And not that like me not going in to college right out of high school keeps me from going back. Like that's the problem. But like it's because the problem is, well, what am I going for, and what am I even doing, and like why am I even going? So just trying to figure out like those questions first, and then setting out a plan for myself, like on a practical level, like if I really want to do this, and if I really am gonna commit myself to do this, man, go for it. But that's what I would tell myself. That's why I wish I had the wisdom back then. But I think I was just like, I gotta go.
You're 18.
No.
So I think that's exactly what I would tell myself too. It's just knowing exactly what you're signing up for, and not feeling like you're under pressure from anybody. At the end of the day, this is your choice, and this is going to affect you and your life, and you shouldn't let other people's opinions determine your future. And so then just know what you're doing before you sign on that dotted line, and seek out people like Yangers who actually knows this what it takes to get through it, and then take care of, like, seek out mentors. I would definitely tell myself to just go seek out somebody who's been there and done that, so that I can make an informed decision, because I did not make an informed decisions. And is that partly my fault? Absolutely. Is it partly the system that we kind of grew up in yet? I would say yes too. So yes, be informed of just everything that you're going to sign up for, and bring it back to what Yanger said earlier too, was just that short-term sacrifice. The things that you're going to do now, it's only 10 years of your life. So it's not, if you get into college you can still take care of whatever comes after college, with debt, with relationships, with anything like that. If you're going to get into college, then make those sacrifices of going to college, working during college, and sacrificing that friendship. Although you're not going to eliminate it all the way, but just knowing and being disciplined enough to set a balance between it, and then knowing what comes after college, knowing like who to go to talk about budgeting, which I do believe that everybody should do, and then knowing how to make these payments and get a job that can provide for those things, and just not to not look at your life as a failure when you're 24 years old, when you're 25 years old, even if things don't go your way. Yeah, life is a journey. Everybody's on a different path. So, youngers, thank you for joining us and kind of just giving us wisdom. I think a lot of kids who are going into college need to hear this. It doesn't, and a lot of times it doesn't come from parents. It's going to come from people like us who are just have been there and done it. So thank you for taking your time and just kind of come talking about this topic and the topic earlier too. So we're happy to have you if you want to join us again.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
That'd be fun.
If you got another topic, let us know.
Let us know. So
We could talk about some of those core issues in the churches.
ooh, let's go. Actually, we're getting close to that, so we'll have you in on that. We're gonna have like a round table on that. So yes, for those listening right now, thank you guys for joining in. Next week we're gonna have a different guest on. Hopefully, I don't know who it is yet, but I'll find out. Thank you for tuning in, listening. So if you need help with college and college debt, understand there is ways to get there, and listen to what Yang has said and given her like life experience and wisdom to you so that you can make an informed decision. So these are unnecessary thoughts, but somehow they are very necessary. So thank you for joining us for our podcast, and we will see you guys later. Peace.